Oh my God, you guys, so I'm coming to you live, old school 70s, with a plethora of papers in front of me, lying next to the cat, this big fluffy fat monstrosity. There, I was waiting for him to meow to agree. Bow, chicka, chicka, bow, bow. The 70s, the 1870s, actually. Or actually, no, I should say the 1770s, because this is where our story begins. So, I know that we've discussed, and has been lore in the Mandela Effect community for a very long time, that there was a 51st state, that a lot of people remember a 51st state. But I've never quite heard, and forgive me if I wasn't paying attention, but I've never quite heard of anybody remembering the name of said state. Now, if you know of a name of said state that they remember being a 51st state, I would love to hear it. Because again, as we well know the drill, this is not just about me telling you what's up or what I think is up or what could be up. This is about you helping me figure out what's up. So I would be very interested to know of this 51st state and what people remember the name of it being, if at all. It kind of reminds me of we had a family down the street from us, and they had 4 kids. And I was always fascinated by a 4-childed family because I came from a family of only children. Well, a family of one only. That was weird, a family of only children. I was the only child. So families with multiple offspring, more than 2, were always a fascination to me. So I remember one day my mom was talking about the Rices down the street, and they had 4 kids. And she goes, "Oh yeah, they have 4 or 5 kids." And I'm like, "Mom, 5 kids? Who would the 5th kid be?" I wanted her to give me names. I wanted her to give me names and not just numbers. But regardless, it's sort of been a thing of fascination to me, if you can call it something, if you can call your phantom memory something. But that being said, the reason that I'm making this video, of course, is to discuss the 51st state. Now, I had never given it much thought because I always remembered 50 states, not 51. But it always fascinated me that there was this phantom 51st state that nobody had a name for, of that I was aware. So one day, I'm listening to my free speech radio station. It has no commercial sponsors, so it says, and I hope it's true. It's called Pacifica. And I listen to it on the weekend mornings, and there was this guy on, and he was talking about political history, and he talked about there being a 14th colony. Now, of course, it was short-lived, so maybe this is just an anomaly and a blip, but it was a 14th colony in our history. And what's weird to me, though, about little things and what we would call factoids, or I would call factoids like this, is that people are very interested in weird factoids and things, and fun facts and all that good stuff. So the fact, I'm using that word again, that I had not heard of this 14th colony until now, way into my middle age, is just very interesting to me. Considering the fact that I watch a lot of news shows, or we used to watch a lot of news shows that had factoids on them. So in any case, this is what's so interesting about it. It's called The True Story of the Short-Lived State of Franklin. Named after Ben Franklin, of course, although it's kind of funny because in this article they don't even talk about that. Okay, so the following article, and by the way, I heard about Franklin on the radio show, I would say maybe about 2 months ago. And when I originally looked it up and Googled it, I Googled Franklin, state of Franklin, between North Carolina and Tennessee. And when I first Googled it about 2 months ago, all these options came up, like a lot of options. And then when I Googled it again, I could just barely find it. And this has kind of been an ongoing, long-running phenomenon. So I don't know if they're switching things on Google up or if it's all part of our synced up reality with technology, whatever your theory is. But I just thought it was really interesting and fascinating how shifty even Google is, because it didn't used to be this shifty. So anyway, let me read the passage from the article that I find so interesting. Okay, so picture it. 1784. And we're talking about between Appalachia and the Mississippi River. We're talking more the western United States, such as it was back then. Okay, So as the story of the lost state of Franklin shows, the American Revolution left some Western communities in complicated circumstances. After the war was won, communities west of the Appalachian Mountains, so we're picturing west of the Appalachian Mountains, like California style, and east of the Mississippi, didn't default to becoming part of the United States. It was never assumed, quote unquote, writes Jason Farr. Remember that name, Jason Farr, not to be confused with Jamie Farr, in the Tennessee Historical Quarterly. Instead, those communities, quote, had the option of creating jurisdictions within existing states or forming new states within the Union, pay attention to that, or creating their own sovereign republics, unquote. The residents of Franklin chose the middle option. So that was creating, forming new states within the Union. Okay. The residents of Franklin chose the middle option, feeling, as George Washington himself feared, that they had become, quote, a distinct people. I'm distinguishing distinct and distant. A distinct people, unquote, from those in the Atlantic states who fought for independence. So I guess these people didn't consider themselves as freedom fighters and independence fighters. The story of Franklin highlights how uncertain the early Union was and the rocky relationship between the original 13 Atlantic states and the West. Okay. So, be patient with me as I old school turn the page. All right. Excuse me. I know that's got to be annoying to the ears, but I didn't cough too close to the camera. Okay. So there was little concern for Western political and economic interests during the Confederation era. Farr, Jason Farr, not to be confused with Jamie Farr, writes, especially among the northeastern elite. Some even assumed that frontier communities, which I guess Franklin was a frontier community, would remain outside the Union. But when Franklin officially declared independence, as it did in 1784, starting with a conference on this day, it showed that the founders had to pay more attention to the West. So they were jockeying for attention. At the time, the land of the state of Franklin was considered to have been 4 counties in North Carolina, which is weird though, because it's where Tennessee would be, I think. However, North Carolina had ceded the land to the United States Congress in April 1784. The settlers in the region, which was known as the Cumberland River Valley, quote, were concerned that Congress would sell the territory to Spain or France as a means of paying off some of the government's war debt, unquote, writes History.com. Not Jamie Farr this time. But I don't know. That's kind of weird, selling it to Spain or France, because it's so landlocked. Like, you just don't think of it as accessible to a foreign country, especially before air travel. But I know I'm probably focusing on the wrong thing. In response to this worry, North Carolina took the territory back and started to organize it as part of the state. Okay. I'm going to turn the page and bug the cat. Bow, ticka, ticka, bow, bow. Okay. But 4 counties decided that they should make their own fate rather than waiting on North Carolina. The president of the Convention of Delegates that made this decision chose John Sevier, a Revolutionary War veteran, as president. And here's a map of what the 8 counties of the state of Franklin circa 1786 look like. And today this is Northeast Tennessee, so it's really not North Carolina. I'm sorry it came out kind of blurry, but it looks like we've got Spencer County, Caswell County, Sherman, Greene, Washington, Wayne, and Sevier, named after John Sevier, which you can see at the top of the page. So, in December of 1784, Franklin declared itself to be an independent state rather than part of the Union, although, as George W. Troxler notes in the Encyclopedia of North Carolina, Franklin wasn't aware that North Carolina had agreed to take it back just a month before. Okay, so there's some duplicity going on there. Quote, the December 1784 Constitution of Franklin did not formally define its boundaries, unquote, Troxler writes. By implication, jurisdiction was assumed over all of the ceded territory and area. approximating the future state of Tennessee. Leaders within the United States began to think this posed a problem for the new Union, writes Farr, again with the Jamie Farr, Jason, because the American Revolution would only live up to its promise if they could keep up the new country together. Franklin existed as an independent state for about 4 years, so it's almost hardly worth noting, but it really is, transacting its own treaties with the Overhill Cherokee, whose land it occupied, and even considering an alliance with Spain. But in the end, the leaders of Franklin decided to rejoin North Carolina in 1789. So that's the story of Franklin. Okay, so I told you the Franklin story. Now on to the next one. And there is a next one, which is so weird because I only expected to find out anything about Franklin. But apparently, there was another nth to the 14th colony before we even had Franklin. And this is something I just haphazardly and accidentally stumbled upon in my search for Franklin because I couldn't find any more articles on it. And I thought this one would have to do with Franklin, but no. This is much earlier than Franklin. Okay, so here we go, and on with our story. The 13 colonies, notice how it's all in boldface. Oh, and by the way, I should tell you that this article actually doesn't actively and proactively talk about an nth to the 14th colony. It just kind of mentions a bunch and then talks about the colonies as it normally would. And then it gets really weird with a map that Ben Franklin had drawn, even though this colony was not named after him. The latter colony that I discussed first, yeah, I probably should have discussed it in reverse, but the latter colony that I discussed first was named after Ben Franklin. Anyway, here goes. The 13 colonies were the British colonies on the Atlantic coast of North America founded between 1607 Virginia and 1733 Georgia. Individual colonies began collaborating at the Albany Congress of 1754 to demand more rights. They set up a Continental Congress in 1774, which declared independence from Great Britain in 1776, woo, and formed new independence from Great Britain in 1776. Oh, I already read that. Jeez. I feel like I'm in Pleasantville, going back and forth on the street in a continuous loop. Okay, so they formed a new nation, the United States of America, in 1776. The 13 colonies were, okay, now here's the place where we blow your socks off. Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts Bay. It's funny they put the Bay on it because I only ever really heard it. It's called Massachusetts. Maryland, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Virginia, New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island. And then they put another and Providence Plantations. See, it was the big fake out. You thought Rhode Island was going to be the last one, but nope. One more, like a glitch in the Matrix, and Providence Plantations, although they don't have the Oxford comma in there, which is very disconcerting to me as a writer. Excuse me. But it's interesting because it's plural. So what does it mean, plantations? I guess just plantations as in farms. Okay, so Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Jersey were formed by mergers of previous colonies. All the colonies had similar political and legal systems with a high degree of self-government. Most white men could and did vote for local and legislative officials. The colonies were all prosperous and had high growth rates based on immigration from Britain and Germany, together with ample food supplies and land for new settlers. Most families operated subsistence farms. All the colonies had legal slavery. That's too bad, but to be expected, with slave-based plantations in the South producing valuable exports such as tobacco and rice. The northern middle colonies concentrated on trade. The frontier districts often confronted Indian wars, but by 1700, the colonists greatly outnumbered the Indians. Just a minute. Okay, bow chicka chicka meow meow. Okay. Excuse me. So the British government in London practiced a policy of mercantilism. It administered the colonies for the benefit of the mother country. Does that sound familiar? While the colonists, after 1760, resisted British demands for more control, especially over taxes, and who can blame them? The colonies were religiously diverse, though overwhelmingly Protestant, like we're really surprised, with the Anglican Church of England officially established in most of the South, but there were no bishops. It's the bishop! And the churches had only local roles. Education was widespread in the northern colonies, which had established colleges such as Harvard and Yale. Harvard. See, you've got to say that with a British accent. Of course, it was going to be Harvard in a British colony. Harvard and Yale, while the College of William and Mary, trained the elite in Virginia. Well, she. Okay, so now it gets really weird. And behold, the snake. Join or die. This looks vaguely familiar to me. And as we can see, there are initials for varying and sundry colonies there. But it's not divided as it should be per se, because from what this article says, it's only in 8 parts. So, Join or Die is a well-known political cartoon created by Benjamin Franklin and first published in his Pennsylvania Gazette on May 9th, 1754. The original publication by the Gazette is the earliest known pictorial. See, pictorial, it's spelled, but I always remember it as pictorial. So I'm thinking that's a glitch in the matrix or a change up in the system. Okay, pictorial. It sounds very much more flowery than pictorial. Okay, so the earliest known pictorial representation of colonial union produced by a British colonist in America. It is a woodcut showing a snake, very significant, and cut into 8ths, with each segment labeled with the initials of one of the 13 American colonies. See, but they're again talking about 13 American colonies. So there's no 14th colony, although they say there are more than 13 colonies. But they don't make reference to Franklin, just this plantation state. Excuse me. Okay. So rather than so New England was represented as one segment rather than the 4 colonies it was at the time. In addition, Delaware, then a part of Pennsylvania, interesting, and Georgia were omitted completely. Thus, it has 8 segments of the snake rather than the traditional 13 colonies. The 2 northernmost British American colonies at the time, Nova Scotia, see that's interesting, and Newfoundland were not represented, so I guess maybe they're saying that that's a part of the more than 13 colonies. See, I didn't know that, but then again, I'm not, the most savvy about history, but you guys take from this what you will. Okay, so the 2 northernmost British American colonies at the time, Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, were not represented, nor were any British Caribbean possessions. The cartoon appeared along with Franklin's editorial about the disunited state of the colonies and helped make his point about the importance of colonial unity. This cartoon was used in the French and Indian War to symbolize that the colonies needed to join together with Great Britain, that's sleight of hand, to defeat the French and the Indians. It became a symbol of colonial freedom during the American Revolutionary War. So that's really interesting. A cartoons, well, that's kind of a creepy cartoon, like those creepy 1930s Depression era cartoons. A cartoon drawn by Ben Franklin of the ostensibly more than 13 colonies, the namesake of which would end up being one of the original 14th colonies. I think that'd be interesting to have a state named Franklin. I know there are towns named Franklin, like there's one in Pennsylvania, but that's a good name for a state. That could be a very good 51st state, Franklin. Anyway, that's about all. Peace out.